Good evening. This is Friday Night with Byline Times. I'm Hardeep Matharu.
And I'm Peter Jukes, and we'll be bringing you what the papers don't say.
And what the TV doesn't tell you. Coming up on tonight's show, the murder of Sarah Everard has shocked Britain. And with her killer, a serving police officer, Wayne Couzens, sentenced this week to a whole life term, we learnt of her horrific last hours and how he abused his position as a police officer to kidnap and to murder her. Now, in response, women have told to be more streetwise, with the police advising us to flag down buses if we're unsure on the streets and to call 999 to verify the identity of police officers. We'll be speaking to our own Chief Social Affairs Correspondent, Sian Norris, to look at the depth of misogyny and violence against women within the police's own ranks. And we'll also be joined by the Labour MP, Butler, to examine the varying forms of institutional corruption within the police and how it gets tackled when the leadership of the Met seems reluctant to do this.
We'll be also looking at the infamous B word, Brexit, with government ministers telling us that supply chain problems and energy crises and shortages are Europe-wide. We'll be going to Germany to speak to our journalist there, Mike Stutchbury, and see if that is true. And in a week which held the first ever live Labour Party conference with Keir Starmer as leader, we'll also be talking to Dawn Butler about the future of the party, how she sees the way it could go forward with Starmer, and also our poll, our exclusive poll of Byline Times, whether the leadership is avoiding the Brexit word and shouldn't.
But first of all, as we always say, thank you to all of those out there who support us. This is your TV channel and this is your show. We don't have billionaire proprietors, so we really do rely on all of our viewers supporting us and spreading the word. And if you haven't yet signed up, you still can. Just head over to patreon.com/Byline TV or just hit the join button on YouTube, because there are plenty of benefits from doing so.
Yeah, lots of benefits, Hardeep, including tonight and every night a special After Dark Q&A with our guest, and tonight that'll be Dawn Butler MP. If you sign up, you could ask her questions, anything you like, in secret, just the three of us and maybe a few others. And if you have already signed up, if you are a Patreon supporter, you'll get an email telling you about the After Dark Q&A when it happens. But Byline TV is a sister organisation of Byline Times. We're Byline Times. Hardeep's the editor. I'm the executive editor, whatever that means. And we work together very well, and Byline Times has done a fantastic ad for us now. You'll see it in a moment, and that's just showing you some of the impact that the paper has had on recent events and what we like to describe as the power of the paper. What can a proper paper do? Well,
a year and a half before the Colston statue came down, Byline Times is exposing the continuing legacy of the British Empire. And in the time since, we've been chronicling the divisive battles in Boris Johnson's culture war. But more importantly than that, we've been providing our readers with the understanding and the tools to fight back.
2 years ago, Byline Times helped expose the reliance of Boris Johnson on hedge funds and city traders for his leadership campaign. And that was debated in Parliament. Since then, we've exposed the role of Russian oligarchs and helped release the Russia report.
We've investigated cronyism at the very heart of government, not least the £3 billion worth of COVID contracts awarded to Tory friends and donors. As a result of our work, several of the people involved in the decisions have now been removed from their positions.
In the wake of the Plymouth shooting, Byline Times exposed the inner workings of the incel movement so that people in the UK could understand the links between extremist misogyny, terrorism and the global war on women.
At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, Byline Times was the first paper to actually expose the herd immunity scandal. More recently, we've been looking at the corporate takeover of the NHS, the most blatant example of which is the government's attempt to sell RGP data. We broke this story many months ago, and as a result of breaking the story, more than 1 million people opted out from this scheme. That is the power of the paper.
That's the power of the paper.
That's the power of the paper.
That is the power of the paper. So, our digital front page every week. We've got the print edition coming up next week, which we'll show at the end, a little preview of the front page. But our front page this week, Hardeep.
Reality check is our theme, Peter.
There's kind of a dual title before we get to the incredibly disturbing news about the Met Police, other police forces and women. We actually, because we led on that last week, before it all sort of became major news in very tragic circumstances this week, we led on stories we'll talk about, but we've actually led on the B word, our poll about what people feel the Labour Party should do about the mounting elephant in the room. I won't mention it. I won't mention Brexit. All the things that are happening. We're going to talk to Mike Stutchbury in Stuttgart soon about what's happening in Germany. And a poll we commissioned. Actually, we didn't pay for it, by the clear. It's all done under standards. You can see the tabs and the details saying people think the Labour Party should mention it. There's also an article by Mike Buckley about how Labour deal with the B word. Should they go for it now? And also a great piece by Sam Bright about ongoing energy crises if Britain doesn't join the European consortium list. But then we have the second half of the front page.
Yes, so as you said, Peter, last week we led on 4 investigations looking at the statistics that back up the problems of institutional sexism within the police. And this week we focused on domestic abuse. So these are 2 stories on our digital front page which focus on the extent to which police officers have themselves been involved in domestic abuse incidents, and also the fact that 114 women have died in the past decade in domestic-related incidents after having come into contact with the police, so they would have reported their concerns to the police. So again, both of these issues point to systemic issues within the police, and we'll be discussing them in a bit with Sian and Dawn Butler. But I should say, Peter, that, our coverage from last week, led by Sian Norris and Sacha Lavin, our new reporter, has been credited this week in the mainstream media, not just in the BBC and ITV and The Guardian, but also has been cited by the Victims Commissioner for England, Dame Vera Baird QC. So, we might just be a small paper, but as you say, there's power in what we do.
Well, we should remake that ad with Sacha and Sian go, that's the power of the paper. Amazing work from very young journalists and doing those FOIs, very hard work. I think the first request went out in May. So the kind of graft and difficulty getting those facts out. But while we're talking about facts and this government's reluctance to admit them, let's briefly go to the Brexit issue, the B word. Now, just before we talk to Mike, who's on the line from Stuttgart, earlier this week, a minister, Simon Clarke, a Treasury minister, was asked, why are we getting shortages in petrol stations and then being locked up? And his answer was quite instructive.
As I say, are not unique to this country. The idea that this is somehow just a British problem is fundamentally wrong. There's a shortage of 400,000 HGV drivers across Europe. We share that problem. As I say, it's driven in part by workforce demographics. It's worsened by COVID restrictions. And in that regard, this is a common problem. We need to play our role in fixing.
And worsened by Brexit. That's just a fact, isn't it?
Well, no, it's not a fact. In fact, actually,
really, it's not a factor at all.
The fact that we want to control immigration, the fact that we need to boost.
Yeah, no, I understand why we did it, and we may still be keen on doing it. Yeah, but it has in the short term. It has. Why can't we just be plain about it? We would be in a better position vis-à-vis HGV drivers if we had not at least left the single market.
No, I don't. I really don't accept that. I think we have a problem which we need to fix, but one which is shared by other European countries too. The idea that this is about Brexit is to try and take us back into what is really, I'm afraid, quite a negative conversation around opportunities forgone. When if you look at the situation in Germany, if you look at the situation in Poland, if you look at the situation in France, they share these problems too.
Well, so there you have it, Mike. It's all happening in Poland, Germany, as well as England. Can I just ask you, are you queuing for petrol? Are you worried about getting a turkey or pigs in blankets for Christmas?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, I live next to a rather large petrol station, and at no stage are we seeing any kinds of queues. And I would have to say it's the only petrol station for some distance. There's never any queues there. In fact, I'm hearing the lorry or the tanker coming in every day to deliver, the petrol that is needed. And in terms of supermarkets, I've not noticed any shortages at any of the supermarkets that I'm going to around the Stuttgart area. Often around parts of town, doing different things and having to pop in. The shelves are full. There's no shortages of anything.
Really, no,
there hasn't been.
We're getting lots, and just no empty shelves at all. You're not being told that things are delayed because of supply chain issues.
There's no supply chain. There's no talk of supply chain issues here. Not for supermarkets. Not for any goods that people are ordering online. Generally, there's a sense that everything's working. And when people are sort of thinking about the situation in England and they're seeing footage of these petrol stations with queues, they simply can't believe it. It's something that's completely inconceivable to them.
Well, that does beg the question, really. You've lived in Germany now for 2 years. I last saw you 2 years ago, I think, at the Byline Festival. And now you spent the last 2 years there, and you obviously lived through Brexit, Britain, come from Australia, lived in Britain, were a teacher, and wrote brilliant stuff on history for Byline Times. Now you've been away for 2 years. What's your view of Britain from the continent?
Well, a lot of that is based on the media that I'm consuming. That's basically the German media in relation to Brexit. When I first got here, the media was I would say that it was a sort of a bemused depiction of Brexit and the negotiation process, and it was all very how do I put this? Yeah, I would say bemused. But as time has gone on, there's been a real sense of worry, and I've had plenty of people come up to me, and I've had German journalists ask me, "What's going on? This is beyond the pale. The people in England can't really be believing what they're hearing, right? And they can't really be putting up with this. If there were similar situations in many German cities, there'd be significant protests."
Or in France, particularly, wouldn't there?
In France, particularly, and we're not seeing them in France either.
So it's gone from
bemused and sort of quizzical to a real bafflement and tinged with worry. And I mean, I'm not just talking about papers like the Süddeutsche Zeitung or the Frankfurter Allgemeine. I'm talking about Deutsche Welle, ARD, ZDF, major broadcasters across the country are sort of really looking at it and saying, this is something that we've never really sort of seen before in a first world European country. These kind of shortages outside of some sort of really pressing natural disaster.
So it's Germany. I've watched a couple of really good documentaries in Germany about Brexit. So what would you say their diagnosis? They're obviously worried about us. They see this as inflicting self-harm. Obviously, Brexiteers blame them for some reason for the supply chains. I can't imagine how, because hundreds of thousands of HGV drivers are short here, and a lot were European who can no longer get visas. Do you have a sense that lots of Germans will be rushing to come here for 3 months to help out deliver Christmas? Because they've been written to, haven't they, by Logistics UK, saying come over and drive for us and leave on Christmas Eve.
Well, not that I'm walking in the circles of truck drivers and lorry drivers, but the sense is that why would you want to go to England and deal with this visa process and deal with all the rigmarole that comes with going to the UK now, when you could easily be driving an alternate route through Europe, or bringing groceries to Germany or whatever it is to Germany or France or Spain or any of these countries. England. Handing over to England is not a proposition that lorry drivers or anybody really seems to be interested in.
So, and what do you think? I mean, obviously there are intellectuals you cited the papers from the left or the liberal centre, but also popular news organisations. What would you say? So, German you met on the street or at the petrol station next door. What would they think of Brexit? How would they
the sense that I get from most Germans that I meet is a sense of, as I said before, it's bafflement, and it's a real sense of worry. I mean, there is that relationship between the two countries. I mean, obviously there's the long history there, but there is a sense of camaraderie. And when you talk to Germans about Brexit and what it's been like, living through that, they really think, this is one of the most damaging things that a country could do to itself outside of some sort of war. So they don't really know how the country's going to get out of the problem. I think there's a sense that if the UK ever wanted to come back, it's something that would be, they'd welcome it, but they really cannot understand. They think it's incredibly damaging. They think it's lessening the perception of the country or the union on the world stage. It's a catastrophe, essentially.
Wow, Mike, thanks for giving us that insight from abroad. And come and join us again, keep us updated. Maybe send us some pigs in blankets or some turkeys if you can. But it'd be difficult to get through the border. Sure. Also, I'd like you to write for us about this and maybe catch us up with what's happening when there's an election, a coalition is being formed, we don't know what it is yet, and how different German politics are to British politics.
Well, I think there's a lot more negotiation and a lot more compromise involved, let me put it that way.
Well, when that's done, you can tell us about the shape of the new German government. And thank you so much for joining us from Stuttgart on this Friday night.
Thank you.
Well, the issue of police and women and violence against them has created headlines again this week. The murder of Sarah Everard has shocked so many across the country. This week, the serving Metropolitan Police officer Wayne Couzens, who killed her, was sentenced to a whole life term in prison. And we learnt of the horrific details of the last hours of Sarah Everard's life. And we learnt how Wayne Couzens abused his position as a police officer to kidnap and then murder her. Under the false pretense of coronavirus laws, he carried out a fake arrest, handcuffing Sarah and placing him into his car and then driving her across town before raping and murdering her. It has been a case that has been so shocking because Sarah Everard was simply walking home in Clapham, and yet there was nothing to protect her from a serving police officer in the ranks of the Metropolitan Police. Since then, details have emerged about Wayne Couzens' WhatsApp messages between other police officers going through racism, misogyny, homophobia. We've also learnt that he was also been involved in incidents, some just 3 weeks before Sarah's death, with regards to flashing. So there was a pattern of behaviour there. The response to this has been equally shocking. Women have again been told to be streetwise, suggestions that they should know what the law is as to when they can be stopped by police officers. The police themselves had said, well, you can call 999 if you're unsure about the identity of a person who says he's a police officer, or you can flag down a bus on the street if you feel unsure. These are systemic issues, and there is a sense that it goes nowhere near confronting the problems within the Metropolitan Police and other forces. Cressida Dick, the Met Commissioner, has faced calls to resign, but she says that while the trust has been rocked in the police, they can do better. It seems that a bad apples approach seems to be prevailing. In a moment, we'll be talking to the Labour MP Dawn Butler and to Sian Norris, our correspondent, about violence against women and the problem of this within the police's own ranks. But before that, let's take a look at some of the opinions of women in London today to the Sarah Everard murder.
Do you think that's good advice, or do you think
wave down a bus? That's so stupid. No.
Do you think that's good advice?
No.
No.
No, because the bus driver could just be a stain driver. So no, it's not good advice.
No.
But who can you trust? No one.
If a woman is stopped and she doesn't trust the police officer that stopped him, she should wave down a bus. Do you think that's good advice to her?
Well, no, of course not. If we can't trust police officers, I mean, like, can we trust other strangers on the street? I mean, like, it's...
Well, yeah, because like, why are you asking women to change when it's really men's issue that they need to fix? it's not really fair on us, and it's putting the blame on us, essentially saying you've got to fix it, you've got to control how you live your life.
Bus. Do you think that's good advice?
No. What's waving down a bus going to do?
Yeah.
They're not going to stop in the middle of the road.
No. Yeah. And I think if this person's, coming up to you with like malicious intent or whatever they're, trying to do, I don't think they're gonna, stop and say, oh no, wait, fair enough, she's getting on the bus.
Why would we trust the bus as well?
Yeah.
Do you think that's good advice?
No, not really. I don't.
Do you think that's good advice?
No, because you could have someone on a bus that makes you feel unsafe. Yeah. No, not at all.
Not really, because buses don't really need to have that responsibility. I feel everyone should take personal responsibility for their safety, but at the same time, waving down a bus, I don't know if that really is realistic.
I think we should just be able to trust our police officers. It's very weird, or it's very hard in a situation to be like, I'm just checking that you're actually doing the job that you're paid to do. That's a bit weird. I think people should just do the jobs that they're paid to do. It's not us, our job as the public, to be policing the police. I think that kind of defeats the point.
Do you think that's good?
Now, before we discuss Sarah Everard's murder and all the repercussions, I just want to take a few moments to read a statement made by her mother in court just before her killer, serving police officer Wayne Couzens, was sentenced. She said, "In the morning, I wake up to the awful reality that Sarah is gone. Every evening since, at the same time she was abducted, I let out a silent scream. 'Don't get in the car, Sarah. Don't believe him. Run.' Sarah wanted to get married and have children. Now, all of that has gone. He took her life and stole her future, and we will never have the joy of sharing that future with her. Each day dawns and I think, Sarah should be here, leading her life and embracing new experiences. She had so many years ahead of her." We're joined now by Dawn Butler MP. Dawn, thank you for joining us. I mean, it's been such a horrific week. I mean, we can't even imagine what those close to Sarah Everard have been feeling this week, but there's so many of us in the country this week that have just been so shocked and upset by this. And I know I feel far less safe, to be frank, walking the streets, walking home. It's something that's now much more in my head. How do you feel? How have you felt this week, hearing what's come out in court?
I think as the details started to unfold, bit by bit, it almost became unbelievable. You were thinking, this is a serving police officer. And although some of the police are saying they don't see him as an officer, the fact still is he was a serving police officer. His warrant card was valid. It wasn't fake. He knew what to say because we've got this authoritarian, draconian police measures at the moment. And it's not just heartbreaking, it's something where we're saying, well, sorry isn't enough. You can't say sorry. That's not enough. What's going to happen next? How are we going to ensure that this never happens again? How are we going to ensure that all of these rogue police officers that are in the Metropolitan Police and other police services around the country, how are we going to ensure that they are rooted out of the police service? Because at the moment, I don't see a plan or a strategy for that to happen.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, when in Brent, when we had the brutal murder of Bibba and Nicole, there was a police officer, a serving police officer, who took pictures of their dead bodies and posted it on a WhatsApp group. They're still being paid. One, I understand, may have resigned so that he can keep his pension. Now, on Sarah's case, there was also a WhatsApp group Now, there's obviously a problem with WhatsApp groups in the Met Police where there's racist, misogynistic content.
It's about the culture, isn't it?
Absolutely.
When we're talking about all these varying forms of corruption, to be frank, whether it's racism or misogyny against women or homophobia.
Absolutely.
What, in terms of the response, Dawn, to this by the Met Commissioner and other leadership figures within the Met Police, to me, there's a sense of complete denial and a complete unwillingness to look within itself, to cast out these sort of individuals as, you know, they're not representative of all police officers. And of course, there are many, many good officers. What do you think has to change within the police? And how's that going to happen while Cressida Dick insists that these aren't, you know, it's not a systemic problem?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's 100% institutional and systemic and structural. And when you see other police officers saying, especially female police officers saying, I can't call it out because if not, if I'm getting my head kicked in, they're not going to jump in and support me. It's a real issue. Now, we can't get that confused too. There is like 44,000 police officers. The majority of them are good and mean well. But when you've got somebody that's got unparalleled power, when they've got the power to take away your liberty, just one rogue police officer can result in the murder, the killing and the rape of somebody, of a woman, can result in you having your liberty taken away, can change your life and that of your family and friends forever, can diminish you as a person, that even in your death they will, you know, desensitize your remains by taking a picture. You know, this is real important stuff, and I think Cressida Dick has obviously gone through the system. She was there when the police was the report where the police were institutionally racist. I don't think she's got the capability of bringing the change that needs to be done, because she refuses to believe that it's institutional, because all she can see is how far the police have come without realising that's not far enough.
Well, we're also joined by Sian Norris, our Chief Social Affairs reporter. Sian, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, yourself and Sasha Lavin have been conducting a series of investigations, Sian, looking at the police and incidents of sexual misconduct, gross negligence with regards to the investigation of sex crimes, how police officers have started completely inappropriate and abusive relationships with victims, the number of women who have died having reported concerns about domestic abuse to the police. Could you just take us through some of the statistics and the findings that back up what we're talking about, that this isn't just isolated incidents, but a systemic issue?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, Sasha Lavin, who's part of our Byline intelligence team, has done some really interesting research using FOIs into kind of poor behaviour in the police. So she found that in the Met itself, more than 50%, so 52% of Metropolitan Police officers found to have committed sexual misconduct remained in post. This is 43 out of 83 officers in the Met. And some of that sexual misconduct would have been against colleagues as well as, you know, women in the public. I mean, if that doesn't tell you that something systemic is happening, then I don't know what will. I mean, that is a hugely concerning statistic. Now, these are people that would have been disciplined by a sort of independent panel. But again, it's like, why do we have this culture where sexual misconduct is seen as something that's not a firing issue? Other things that Sasha explored was that 3/4 of police officers guilty of gross negligence in regards to sex crimes kept their jobs. And this is across England and Wales. And I think what this tells us, again, is this real crisis that we have around justice for violence against women. So when we're talking about gross negligence and sex crimes, we're talking about police officers who didn't investigate things properly, who didn't respond sympathetically or empathetically to victims when they come forward. We know that we are in a crisis when it comes to rape prosecutions. We are in a historic low of rape prosecutions. Women have a 1 in 70 chance of seeing their rapist go to jail. 98% of accusations of rape are never prosecuted. Only, I think, 1.97% of rape cases are prosecuted. So when we have this issue that police officers who are guilty of gross negligence in investigating these crimes, you can start to see where these patterns are forming. So another thing that we looked at was issues around women who were killed in domestic incidents, so killed by a partner or a family member or a former partner who had contact with the police. And this was really triggered actually by a very interesting and very distressing piece in the New York Times about a young British woman who was put on hold and then she was murdered by her partner or by her former partner. So we know that women go to the police. We know that women speak up. It might take them a very long time. I think there's something like 35 incidents will happen to a woman before she goes to the police in a domestic abuse relationship. But when they finally do go to the police, it doesn't necessarily save their lives, and we have to ask why.
I mean, Dawn, obviously, extremely sadly, this is something we live with in our culture. Women are being killed so frequently. I guess something that's been really shocking about Sarah Everard's death has been the perpetrator, who's a serving police officer. And as Sian highlights these statistics, I mean, how are we ever meant to have faith in the police and trust in the police, as even Boris Johnson is saying that we should continue to have after this, when their own are being found guilty of sexual misconduct? And how do those two things
Absolutely. I put in freedom of information requests in the police services to find out how many police officers have had complaints of domestic violence against them. And every single police service has written back, and they've all had officers that have had. And so it's not going to be easy. And the advice that's been coming out, I mean, it's been ridiculous. It's almost been comical. Women shouldn't have to be streetwise. We're already streetwise. We know we have to hold our keys in our hands. We are taught this from a very young age. We know that we walk in the middle of the road rather than on the pavement. We know that. That's what we do. That's what we build into walking home. We shouldn't have to do that. But what happens to the men who are the perpetrators? What happens to the police officers? People will get confidence when we know that. So I found out today, we had a meeting in Cressida today, found out that they have got some guidance around WhatsApp messages. Well, we need to know what that guidance is. We need to know what the Met Police are doing to ensure that they're rooting out police officers. And also, they need to be punished. They need to be scared. They're still being employed. They're still being paid. We're still paying their wages of police officers who are guilty of gross misconduct, criminal activity, misogyny, rape and murder. He's still being paid. That's not going to build confidence. We need to ensure that police officers are scared, and if they see racism or misogyny or homophobia, that they call it out, because they know if they don't call it out, that they're going to be punished, they're going to be dismissed, and they're going to lose their job. Until the police officers are scared, they should be more scared than women walking the streets.
Absolutely.
And at the moment, they're not.
They're not, which says it all, really. Peter, viewers of our show will know that we focus very heavily on the Daniel Morgan Independent Panel report that came out earlier this year, and I mean, its findings seem relevant tonight, don't they?
I think we've talked about this maybe with Dawn, wasn't it, that its corruption embraces it all, doesn't it? Racism, sexism, the police, unaccountability, looking after your own, a culture of impunity. And I think it goes back to that, I don't know how you feel, is that it's no good talking about bad apples. It's a rotten tree. If it keeps on producing these bad apples, who can get away with it? There were warning signs. He could have been stopped, It's not just about punishment, it's about prevention. And it's just an incredible position. We have an incompetent, unaccountable government. I will say that my feeling, ministerial code is not being enforced. And so you have a very beleaguered Met Commissioner who is, who they won't hold accountable either. So it's like, in a way, the corruption spreads.
Sian, what's your view on some of the ways we can tackle this? I mean, there seems to be serious institutional problems with the police, but also is there something about the wider culture we live in? I mean, misogyny, violence against women, you've talked about this before. How do we get those conversations started? Not just between women, because we know this stuff, but between all of us.
So I think in terms of the police, we need to have an independent inquiry into how Wayne Couzens was allowed to be in post. We know that he had history of indecent exposure. We know that he was nicknamed a rapist by his colleagues. There is something rotten in this situation that needs to be publicly exposed and explored fully and independently. And I think until we have that, it's going to be very, very hard to really trust the police and understand what has been going on in the last, decades, let's say. In terms of wider society, yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, we've got this incredibly disturbing issue around rape prosecutions. There are about 85 to 86,000 rapes in England and Wales every year, and a prosecution rate of 1.97%. That means that every day rapists are walking around, they are free to harm women, and they know that. They know that they can do it with impunity. I mean, a lot of feminists are saying that rape has been effectively decriminalised in this country as a result of the failures in the justice system for women at the moment. So in order to tackle that, I wish I had a sort of golden answer that would fix it all. I always say the same kind of things. We need to have much better education around consent and respect. We need to be challenging the misogyny in our own friendship groups, in our own workplaces, in our own communities. Just as, we were saying that, if these WhatsApp groups exist and in the police and people are failing to challenge the racism, homophobia and misogyny in that space, we also have a duty to do it in our own spaces. If you're a man and your friend makes that sexist joke, don't just snigger or laugh or pretend to laugh. Call it out, ask why they think this is acceptable. So we can all take those small steps. We can all do things to kind of challenge prejudice. We can all do things to challenge misogyny in our own lives. But fundamentally, we need to move away from this culture of victim blaming. I can't believe that I woke up this morning, the day after hearing this terrible sentencing, to be told that I should just hail down a bus. Not everybody lives in the centre of London. There's not that many buses in some rural areas. But even if that was the case, that is not the point. Women do everything all the time to keep ourselves safe. We have been doing this since we were very, very young. We know how to be aware of ourselves on the street. We don't need to be told to hail down a bus. We need to be asking, why have you not stopped raping and killing us?
Thank you so much for your insights, Sian. And thank you, Dawn. And this is definitely a subject that we will be unfortunately having to come back to, but we will keep investigating.
In other news this week, actually retrospectively slightly lighter news, the Labour Party conference, the first live conference since Keir Starmer was elected leader March before, but there was the coronavirus. In a moment, we'll be talking to Dawn about her insights there. But before we do that, we like to be what the papers don't say and what the TV doesn't tell you. So we're not covering the conference floor or that speech in particular. Instead, we went to a festival a fringe festival around the conference called The World Transformed, and talked to some on the left of the party who were not happy with the direction the party was going under Keir Starmer.
The issue is we've got to develop policies that can empower people and enthuse people, and an obsession with rules within the party simply doesn't cut it. The only way you go in an election is by mobilising and enthusing people, and if all you can offer is complaints about other members of your own party, and all you can offer is that you will get rid of people, suspend people, well, it's not very attractive. People want to join something that does something.
It needs to be more exciting. The conference feels a little bit dull, if I'm honest with you. People feel a little bit depressed. The only exciting thing was the Jamaica party.
It's pretty boring in there. Having been in there a little bit myself. People are still excited and people do still want to come here and talk about the ideas, because things like climate breakdown haven't stopped just because Keir Starmer's in control of the Labour Party and doesn't want to do anything about it.
The shift to the right that has happened under Keir, I think a lot of people who voted for him, I can only from listening to them, feel very disgruntled, feel that, he came in on a kind of what you call a soft Corbynite platform, and he's completely departed from that. So I think there's a sense of betrayal from a large number of people. And I think, look, he's obviously saying you're not important, the people that are important are the electorate, but the electorate aren't stupid either, and they also watch what the members are saying. And if your members are like, the people that voted for you internally no longer trust you, then that's not a great message. I think there's a changing of the guard taking place, and I think a lot of...
Dawn, before we ask what you felt about Keir Starmer's big conference speech, and that was all recorded before the speech, Can you just reflect on our poll, which is our front page today, which is a large percentage, but 62% of the people we polled said that Labour should make more of Brexit problems. A smaller percentage said they shouldn't, and a very small percentage said there were no Brexit problems. The B word, the elephant in the room, it is being vaguely mentioned now, things are going wrong. What's your attitude to that, and why do they keep quiet about it? Yeah, understanding their perspective, it's gone, but why, and do you think they've made a mistake there strategically?
Well, I think the make Brexit work, I think, isn't a bad slogan in terms of you can't continually ignore the fact that the tanks are empty, you know, the shelves are empty because of Brexit. You know, why would we even try to pretend it isn't because of Brexit? You know, people know that. I mean, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone because, you know, when the referendum was going on, you know, we were told time and time again, we will be suffering for 10 years. Some said 15 years. People said, well, it was a price worth paying. Well, this is it. This is the price that we're paying.
But has something happened? I mean, they have pollsters. Deborah Mattinson, I think, is quite close to the pollster for Keir Starmer, who was, I think, for Gordon Brown, saying don't mention the B word because the last election was badly lost by Labour because the Conservatives' plan was let's get Brexit done, right, get Brexit done. And even Remainers liked that message because they were tired of the word. Has that been the strategy, do you think? I don't know if you've heard, that just don't mention the B word because everybody's bored with it. The B stands for boring too. And is that changing now? It's all unravelling.
Well, I mean, I'm not a part of Keir's kind of polling circle or focus group circle. So I don't know what their strategy is in that respect, but it just seemed strange because everybody else is talking about it. So we'd be silly not to talk about it. But it's not just talking about it. It's not playing politics. Yeah. It's actually talking about the reality of the situation. You know, when people are queuing, to get petrol. I mean, today I was in the car, you know, the driver thought it was traffic. It wasn't traffic, it was the queue to get petrol. So when people are queuing to get petrol, there's a reason. Why is the reason? You know, we've got HGV shortage. Well, why is that? You know, Byline has done a whole series of programmes talking to HGV drivers, and they're saying you're going to have an HGV shortage.
6 months ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
because
it's not
of EU drivers, not because of DVLC licences.
Right. So it's not a surprise. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. So I think politics can do with a little bit more honesty and a little bit more plain speaking.
You're very good on us. You still have to face the speaker, don't you, for calling our current Prime Minister a liar.
Yes.
What's the process there?
So, I mean, I'm back in Parliament now, so I've been allowed back in Parliament. I haven't actually been selected to speak yet on the floor of the House. So
were you punished for that? No, you were just excluded.
I was punished for the day, you know, excluded, and had to leave the building as well, which was a surprise and a shock to me. So I was punished for the day, but I'm back. But the thing is, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, is still lying.
Well, they're lying now. We caught them saying what's happening in Germany, all these shortages. They're not. Do you think, and I've heard this from Labour MPs across the party, not just from, I don't know, you consider yourself a left, but across the party, different sections of it, saying there's lots of open goals, which, you know, the leadership is not kicking into. Is that because a classic thing, don't seem negative, or the other line is don't interrupt your enemy in the midst of making a mistake while they're making a mistake? Is there a strategy for it, or is it just caution and timidity?
But I think the government's made so many mistakes, but by us not interrupting them, they've been able to PR their way out of a mistake.
Right.
And I think that we shouldn't allow that to happen, because they have to take responsibility for the mistakes that they are making and the damage that they're doing to our country and the money that they're stealing from the public purse. Yeah. So if we don't interrupt and disrupt what they're doing, they will get away with it. And it's our responsibility as Her Majesty's official opposition to interrupt.
And the good news is on that several of the ministers who are named, Good Law Project has been investigating him. It's very much named in our 50 articles about coronavirus contracts. Lord Bethell, Matt Hancock, and then when it comes to the city funds, Robert Jenrick have left posts. And Gavin Williamson has gone as well, hasn't he? So maybe, you know, you're asking questions in Parliament in a way that's great for us because we have parliamentary privilege, even if though you break it sometimes by calling him a liar. But So what did you, we had those interviews with you and other MPs who are disaffected by what's happened last year and a half under Starmer in terms of inclusiveness, if you like. And did the speech impress you in any way, or did you come away disappointed or surprised, his conference speech?
Well, the thing is, nobody votes for a disunited party. Nobody likes that. So we have to be a party that's together. We need to learn that from the Tories, right? I think Keir's speech had some good bits in it. It was way too long.
Hour and 10 or something?
Hour and 30, I think. So it was too long a speech. I mean, maybe that was deliberate. I mean, this thing about slogans, at the end of the day, when somebody's protesting about our lack of support for £15 an hour, we need to listen. And actually, slogans and modern day politics lends itself to slogans more than it does a 12,000 word essay. So these lessons are lessons that we have to learn if we're going to.
So the three-word £15 an hour is almost a three-word slogan, like take back control or get Brexit done. You feel there's a lack of kind of core urgency of the message, a slogan like that.
Yeah, and also commitment to what we stand for as a Labour Party. I mean, the Green New Deal was good. So there was some good stuff. I mean, I haven't studied the speech, I'll be honest with you.
You were in the room, were you there?
I wasn't in the room, no, right. But I was watching. So I haven't studied the speech, but so there were some good bits in the speech. And there were some bits that, I mean, there's all this talk of not throwing away what Labour Party has done well. And that should stand no matter what time of the Labour Party you're referring to.
So you think, to cut to the chase here now, do you feel that sort of the good bits of the Corbyn legacy, or that are previous years, or even are being thrown out, and the party's shifting back to a kind of Blairite right-wing movement, or what do you think's happened?
But I think they want people to think that right. We're just leaving, everything to do with Corbyn behind. There were some good bits. The manifesto was a fully costed manifesto, actually. The bad thing was that it was, it was appalling the way it was tried to sell it to me. I called it like the Toby Carvery of manifesto. It was just chuck in new things at people every day. People could not take that on board. We couldn't understand all of the policies. It was too many policies, but it was all fully costed. And we shouldn't move away from that. And the fact is that this pandemic government has implemented a lot of the policies from the 2017-2019 manifesto. So let's not throw it all out and pretend that it wasn't, that they weren't effective policies, because that's being, given a disservice to some really hard work that took.
So is there a bit of messaging going on for certain parties, that the left-wing slant is over, but internally, that could be outside messaging. Is there a chance of building unity in the next 2 or 3 years, whatever, to election, around the manifesto? Is it gone, the talks? Because when Batley and Spenders talked that he'd have to leave, there'd be a new leader. Do you think there's an acceptance Labour Party there?
This is a huge lesson. Yeah. If you don't build unity, Labour will not win.
Right.
And so to pretend, that anything else but that is just naive. To think that you can appeal to the Sun and the Sun readers and you think that you're going to get on the front page. We're not in the Blair era. Things have changed. Social media plays a big part in how people absorb their news
so you don't need
and information. Yeah. So legacy media is not dominating how people absorb their information. So thinking that is very naive.
Do you think that struggle, obviously very unpopular with the public when a party's seen as being divisive or divided into these line fighting, do you think that will settle down, will negotiate, that the left and the soft left and the right will find a route forward before the next election, given the threats of another Boris Johnson administration or potentially economic crisis, a winter of discontent?
Well, I hope so, because at the end of the day, if you look at how some of the MPs treated Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader, Keir has not had that treatment from MPs, because at the end of the day, I want us to win the next general election. I want Labour to be in government. There's very few of us who've actually served in government. I have, and I want us to get there. And I know divided parties do not win elections.
Well, we'll keep on talking to you about this, Dawn. It's very interesting and very important for the country situation in Labour, whether you're a Labour supporter or not. Dawn will be staying with us, and in a few moments after the end of the show, she'll be staying for our After Dark Q&A, and she can tell you anything else she wants to tell you in secret, just among us and whoever else subscribes.
Yes, and don't forget, if you're a Patreon member, check your inboxes, because you should have got an email which contains a link for the After Dark Q&A. And I think those of you who join us via YouTube, you should be able to look for the link on our community tab. But just before we go, we've been working on a few things, haven't we, Peter?
Well, we had that film we did, and we've also, I'm not sure George has found it yet, but on our social media, you will see our draft front page for the print edition. So our news site is free. You get to read all our stories for niche, but the way we can pay the journalists to write them, because they need to earn a living, minimum wage, I don't know, hope we pay them more than £10, £15 an hour, is by paying them to write the stories and to edit them and produce them, and that is done by subscribing to our print edition, which is coming out next week. That we've got a dummy cover, and it says running on empty, and has a picture of Boris Johnson nearly crashing a car and getting out in a great hurry. Also has a whole section on sexual violence in the Met towards women. Do purchase it, subscribe. It's only £3 a month.
But free from fear or favour, and do keep spreading the word. We also are quite excited to finalise the book cover. So Byline Times has its first book, which is called Woke Law, the Boris Johnson Culture Wars and Other Stories. So it's not just about the culture wars, it's a catchy headline that we thought might stop people's attention in shops, but it is 30 thought-provoking long reads from the first 2 years of Byline Times. We go from 1970s Europe to Putin's Russia, we look at the empire in Kenya, COVID, Johnson, populism, and of course, the media and big data. So do take a look at that book. It's available to pre-order now.
So thank you, Dawn, for coming in. Thank you, Hardeep, for editing the book. Edit the book as well as the paper.
Pleasure.
We'll be back next week, and we'll be on very shortly in our After Dark session in about 5 or 10 minutes' time. Thanks for joining us tonight, and do tune in next Friday night for Friday Night Live with Byline TV and Byline Times, 8 o'clock Friday next week.
We'll see you here next week.